She married a cowboy to save her ranch, and found a love she never expected. Emma hadn't imagined this would be her life. Standing in the middle of her father's ranch, she could feel the weight of the land pressing down on her shoulders. The grass stretched for miles, the wind whispered through the trees, and in the distance the cattle roamed. Yet, despite all the beauty that surrounded her, Emma's heart felt heavy. The ranch was dying, and with it, the dream her father had spent his life building. Her father had always said that the ranch was more than just land and livestock. It was a legacy, something to be passed down to future generations. But Emma wasn't sure if she even believed in legacies anymore. Not when the letters from the bank kept arriving, each one more urgent than the last. Not when the sound of hooves pounding against the dirt had become a reminder that time was running out. The ranch was on the brink of foreclosure, and Emma, alone and overwhelmed, had no idea how to stop it. She'd never expected to be in this position. Growing up, Emma had always been surrounded by family. Her father, a strong, kind man who had taught her everything she knew about running a ranch, and her mother, who had passed away when Emma was still a child. It had been her father who had raised her, guiding her through the tough days and teaching her to stand firm against the world. But now, without him, the world seemed like an unforgiving place, and Emma was unsure how to navigate it. Every day felt like a battle. The cattle needed tending, the fences needed repairing, and the land, her father's pride, needed to be managed. But the money wasn't coming in, and the debts kept piling up. She had tried everything, selling off a few acres, cutting back on costs, and even reaching out to local buyers, but nothing seemed to work. The bank was still determined to take the ranch, and Emma didn't know how to fight them. She stood by the weathered barn, staring at the horizon, and thought about all the years her father had spent building this place, making it a home, a livelihood. How could she let it all slip away? How could she tell the world that she had failed him? It was in the midst of this despair that she met him. Caleb Donovan was a cowboy, one of those men who seemed to live for the open range. He had the kind of presence that commanded attention without trying, a quiet strength that was impossible to ignore. He had grown up on a neighboring ranch, a piece of land just as expansive and untamed as Emma's. And like Emma, he understood what it meant to fight for what mattered most. Their first meeting was by chance. Emma was out in the fields, checking on the cattle, when she saw a familiar figure approaching. Caleb, riding his horse, stopped beside her. He was a man of few words, but his eyes spoke volumes. "I heard about your troubles," he said, his voice low and steady, like the rumble of thunder before a storm. "The bank's giving you trouble." Emma didn't have the energy to hide her frustration. She had heard the rumors before, but hearing them from him, from someone who knew the land, made it feel real. "It's bad," she admitted. "I've tried everything I can think of, but it's just not enough." Caleb looked at her for a moment, his gaze softening as he surveyed the ranch. "I can help," he said finally. "I've got experience. I know how to manage cattle, how to fix up the land. If you need a hand, I'm your man." Emma was surprised by his offer. She had never really spoken to Caleb before, only heard about him in passing. He was known as the kind of man who worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and minded his own business. But this was different. He was offering to help save her ranch, without any clear reason why. "I don't need charity," Emma replied, though her words lacked the usual force. "I don't need anyone to feel sorry for me." Caleb didn't flinch. "It's not charity, Emma. I'm offering a business deal, a partnership. You get the help you need to save the ranch, and I get my share of the profits." She hesitated, unsure if she should trust him. But there was something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite name, that made her feel like he wasn't just offering help for the sake of it. Maybe he understood the pressure she was under, the weight of responsibility. "I don't know," Emma murmured, her fingers nervously twisting a strand of her hair. "I've never worked with someone before. I've always done things on my own." Caleb smiled, a small, knowing smile that made him seem both kind and confident. I'm not asking you to trust me right away, but if you give me a chance, I can help you turn things around." She studied him, weighing her options. The idea of asking for help, especially from a stranger, didn't sit well with her, but she had nothing left to lose. The ranch was slipping away, and with it, her father's memory. Could she afford to turn down someone who was willing to help? "You're serious?" she asked, her voice a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Dead serious," Caleb replied. "But it's not a handout. We'll work together. I know how to handle cattle, how to fix fences, and I've got connections who might help us get back on our feet." It was a tempting offer, but the part of Emma that hated feeling vulnerable fought against it. She had been raised to handle everything on her own, to carry the burden of her family's dreams without asking for help. To accept this offer would be to admit she couldn't do it by herself. Yet, looking at Caleb, looking at the land that had been her father's pride, she realized that maybe she didn't have to carry the weight alone. Maybe, just maybe, she could let someone in. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. Caleb nodded, tipping his hat slightly. "Take all the time you need, but I'm here when you're ready." Over the next few days, Emma wrestled with the decision. She had always been independent, had always prided herself on being able to handle anything that came her way. But she was beginning to realize that pride had its limits. The ranch wasn't just hers anymore. It was her father's legacy. And if she lost it, she didn't know who she would be. The more she thought about it, the more Caleb's offer made sense. The idea of a partnership, of sharing the load, didn't seem so bad. Maybe with his help they could save the ranch. Maybe they could bring it back to life. But there was another question that nagged at her. Who was Caleb really? He had helped her once, but could she trust him to follow through? And why was he offering his help in the first place? One evening after dinner, Emma found Caleb standing near the barn, his back to her, looking out over the fields. She hesitated for a moment before walking up to him. "I've decided," she said quietly, her heart pounding in her chest. Caleb turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I'll take you up on your offer," Emma said, "but I need to know that you're in this for the right reasons. I don't want someone here just because they think they can take advantage of me. I need to know you're here to help, no strings attached." Caleb met her gaze, his eyes steady. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Emma. I'm here to help you save this place. And if you want me to leave after that, I'll go. But I'm not going to let you lose this ranch. Not while I'm here." Emma studied him for a long moment. There was sincerity in his words, and something in her gut told her she could trust him. So, with a deep breath, she made her choice. "All right," she said, the words feeling both heavy and freeing. "Let's do this." And just like that, her journey to save the ranch and her heart was about to begin. But she had no idea how much more it would change her life. The first few days after Emma agreed to Caleb's offer were a whirlwind. Caleb was everything she hadn't expected. He wasn't pushy or overbearing. Instead, he worked alongside her, quietly and efficiently, showing her new ways to tackle the tasks that had become overwhelming for her. His knowledge of ranching was vast, and Emma quickly realized that what had felt like an insurmountable mountain of work was more manageable with his steady presence beside her. It was early mornings when Emma felt the weight of her decision most. She would wake up before dawn, the dark sky still clinging to the earth, and hear the familiar sounds of the ranch settling into its rhythm. The soft rustle of the wind through the tall grass, the distant call of the cattle, and the creak of the barn as the old wood settled all made her feel the heaviness of her father's legacy pressing down on her. This ranch was everything to him, and now it was everything to her. The thought that she might lose it terrified her more than she had expected. Caleb was already out in the fields when she arrived, his broad back bent over a broken fence post. He had his sleeves rolled up, his hands steady as he worked. Watching him, Emma couldn't help but feel a strange sense of admiration. His strength wasn't just physical. It was a quiet, unshakable kind of strength that came from years of doing the hard work without seeking praise. He was used to getting his hands dirty, used to laboring in the sun without complaining. It was something she admired in him, though she was careful not to let him see it. "Morning," Emma said as she approached, adjusting her hat against the rising sun. Caleb looked up and nodded. "Morning, got a lot to do today. Think we can finish the fence?" She nodded, already feeling the familiar buzz of responsibility. "We can do it. We've got to." For the next few hours they worked side by side, repairing the fence that had long needed attention. The sun climbed higher in the sky, the heat growing more intense with each passing hour, but Caleb's presence made the work bearable. There was no rush, no stress, just the steady rhythm of hammering posts into the ground and tightening wires. The simplicity of it was almost soothing, and Emma couldn't remember the last time she had felt so at ease in her own skin. At lunchtime, they sat on the porch of the old house, eating the sandwiches Emma had packed. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. Instead, it felt like the kind of silence shared by two people who had already come to understand one another in some unspoken way. Emma glanced at Caleb as he chewed his sandwich, his focus entirely on the task at hand. "You really know your way around this place," she said, breaking the silence. "I didn't realize how much I've been missing." Caleb chuckled, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "It's second nature for me. I've been around ranches my whole life. There's a lot to learn, but once you get the hang of it, it all falls into place." Emma nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had spent so many years trying to do everything on her own, convinced that asking for help was a weakness. But now, with Caleb by her side, she was beginning to see that there was strength in sharing the load. After lunch, they continued working. Caleb was patient with her, teaching her how to properly set the posts, how to gauge the right distance between them, and how to use the tools she had never really understood before. With each passing day, Emma's confidence grew. She was learning things she never thought she would, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was making real progress. But the partnership wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when Emma felt her independence being tested. Caleb had a way of taking charge, a way of stepping in when things got difficult, and Emma couldn't help but feel a flicker of resistance each time he did. She had always handled things on her own, and now, having someone else's help felt strange, almost like she was giving up a part of herself. She didn't want to feel weak or dependent. One evening, after a long day of working in the fields, Emma found herself sitting on the porch, her thoughts swirling. The ranch was slowly improving, but the more time she spent with Caleb, the more complicated things became. She could feel the tension building between them, the unspoken attraction that neither of them had addressed. They had never discussed it, but Emma could sense that Caleb was more than just a business partner to her now, and she wasn't sure what to do with that feeling. Caleb came out to join her, wiping the sweat from his brow and sitting down beside her. The silence stretched out for a few moments, comfortable in its own way, but Emma could feel the tension hanging between them like a thick fog. "You've been quiet today," Caleb said, his voice calm as always. Emma looked at him, studying the way the sun was setting behind him, casting a warm glow on his face. There was something about him, something steady and dependable that made her want to trust him, even with the feelings she didn't fully understand. "I've just been thinking," she said softly, "about everything, I guess." He nodded, his gaze steady. "I get it. It's a lot to take in, but you're doing well. The ranch is looking better than it has in a long time." "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep asking for help. I've always done everything myself." Caleb turned to her, his eyes softening with understanding. "You don't have to do it all alone, Emma. That's what I'm here for. You don't have to carry everything on your shoulders." His words struck something deep inside her. Emma had spent so many years carrying the weight of the ranch, the weight of her father's legacy, and the weight of her own pride. The thought of letting go of even a small part of it felt like she was losing herself. But Caleb's words were like a lifeline, pulling her out of the sea of doubt she had been drowning in. "I don't know if I can let go of that," she said, looking down at her hands. "It's hard to admit that I can't do it all." "You don't have to let go of it," Caleb replied. "But you don't have to do it alone either. We're partners in this, Emma. Let me help you carry the load." Emma met his gaze, feeling the warmth of his words settle in her chest. It was hard to accept, but she was beginning to realize that maybe it was okay to need help. Maybe it was okay to lean on someone else. Maybe it was okay to let him in. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of hard work, sweat, and growing closeness. The ranch was starting to look better. The fence was repaired, the cattle were healthier, and the land itself seemed to be coming back to life. But the thing that was changing the most wasn't the ranch, it was Emma herself. She was beginning to trust Caleb, not just as a business partner, but as someone who cared for her. It was a strange, uncomfortable feeling, but it was also exciting. But even as their bond deepened, Emma was still cautious. She didn't want to admit that she was falling for him, not yet. She wasn't sure what that would mean for their partnership, for the ranch, or for her own heart. But with each passing day, it became harder to ignore the pull between them. One night, after a particularly long day, Emma found herself standing by the barn again, watching Caleb as he worked with the cattle. The sun was just dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He was so focused on his work, so at ease in his element, that Emma couldn't help but watch him, her heart stirring with emotions she wasn't ready to confront. "Caleb," she called softly, breaking the silence. He looked up, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah," she hesitated, unsure of what to say, but her heart knew. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. I don't know how I would have done it without you." Caleb's smile widened, his eyes warm and sincere. "You're welcome, Emma, but we're in this together now." And in that moment, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The ranch, their partnership, and the unspoken feelings between them. It was all a new beginning, one she wasn't quite ready for, but one she knew she couldn't avoid. The days began to blur together as Emma and Caleb worked side by side on the ranch. The steady rhythm of their days, tending to the cattle, fixing up the barns, and repairing the fences, was starting to feel like a dance. There was a flow to it now, an unspoken understanding between them. Emma was learning to trust Caleb more and more, not just as a rancher but as a person. His quiet strength was beginning to fill a space in her life that she hadn't even realized was empty. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with rich hues of gold and purple, Emma stood at the edge of the field, watching the cattle graze. She had grown accustomed to this part of the day, when everything seemed to slow down, and the earth itself seemed to take a deep breath. It was a time for reflection, for quiet moments that allowed her to think about everything that had changed. Caleb joined her, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached. He had been out in the fields all day, but he never seemed to tire. His work ethic was something she had come to admire, even if she'd never admit it out loud. They stood together in silence for a few moments, the only sound the low hum of the wind and the distant calls of birds. "You know," Caleb said, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking." Emma turned to face him, her brow furrowing slightly. "About what?" "I've been thinking about us," he said, his voice low. "About the future." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had been trying not to think about their future. It wasn't that she didn't care. It was just that every time she allowed herself to imagine anything beyond the ranch, she felt a twinge of fear. Fear that things would change. Fear that the delicate balance they had created might shatter. "You're worried about the ranch, aren't you?" Caleb asked, as if reading her thoughts. Emma hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I'm worried about everything," she finally admitted. "I don't know if I can keep this going. What if it all falls apart again?" Caleb stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. It won't. We've made a lot of progress. You've made a lot of progress. The ranch is in better shape than it has been in years. But it's not just about the ranch, is it? Emma looked away, unsure of how to answer. The truth was, she was terrified. Not just about the ranch, but about the feelings that had been growing inside her. Feelings she had tried to bury, feelings that seemed to have taken root despite her best efforts. The connection between her and Caleb was undeniable, but it was also complicated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. "I don't know what you mean," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb took a deep breath, his gaze softening. "I mean, I know what's been happening between us, Emma. The way we've been working together, the way we've been talking. There's something here, and I think we both feel it." Emma's heart raced, and she took a step back, feeling the space between them grow. "We're partners, Caleb, that's all." For a moment, there was silence again, but it wasn't the comfortable kind they had grown used to. This silence was heavier, filled with unspoken words and emotions that neither of them was ready to acknowledge. "You know it's more than that," Caleb said quietly. "I don't want to push you, but I can't ignore it. I care about you, Emma. I care about this place, and I care about what we've been building together." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what to say, so she said nothing. She couldn't deny that she felt something, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to let it become something more. She had always been independent, had always taken pride in doing things on her own. She didn't know if she could let someone in, especially someone who had become so important to her. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't ask for help, and I didn't ask for feelings. I just wanted to save my ranch." Caleb nodded, his expression gentle. "I didn't ask for it either, but sometimes things just happen, feelings happen, and I think we need to be honest about that." Emma shook her head, her thoughts spinning. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. I've been alone for so long, Caleb. I don't know how to let anyone in." "I'm not asking you to let me in all at once," Caleb said softly. "But I'm here, Emma, and I'll be here whenever you're ready." The tension between them hung in the air like a fragile thread. Emma wasn't sure what to do with the feelings that were rising inside her. She wasn't ready to admit that she cared for Caleb, not yet. But there was something about him, something steady and unwavering, that made it harder to push him away. Over the next few weeks, things between them remained the same on the surface, but beneath that, everything was shifting. Emma couldn't deny that her feelings for Caleb were growing. Every time he smiled at her, every time they worked together in silence, the connection between them seemed to deepen. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Emma could feel it, like a spark that had been kindled in the dark, slowly beginning to grow. They continued their work on the ranch, fixing up the barns and tending to the cattle. Caleb was a natural leader, always knowing exactly what needed to be done and when. He worked tirelessly, and Emma admired his dedication. But there was also something else, something that made her heart flutter every time their hands brushed or their eyes met for just a moment longer than necessary. One afternoon, as they worked in the barn, Emma found herself standing a little too close to Caleb. She could feel the warmth of his body next to hers, the faint scent of him, leather and earth. Her pulse quickened and she took a step back, trying to regain her composure. But Caleb didn't move away. Instead, he looked at her, his gaze soft and steady. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. Emma swallowed, nodding quickly. "Yeah, just thinking." "About the ranch?" Caleb asked. "About a lot of things," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb took a step closer, his hand brushing against hers. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She looked up at him, her heart racing. "You don't have to think about everything all at once," Caleb said softly. "We're in this together, Emma, no matter what comes next." For the first time in a long while, Emma felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from having everything figured out. It was the kind of peace that came from knowing that, whatever happened, she didn't have to face it alone. Caleb was right there beside her, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. That night, as she lay in bed, Emma couldn't stop thinking about what Caleb had said. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take the next step with him, but she also knew that her feelings for him were undeniable. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The next morning, as the sun rose over the ranch, Emma stepped outside and found Caleb already at work as always. She watched him for a moment, the way he moved so confidently, so effortlessly, and she felt a smile tug at the corners of her lips. Maybe the future wasn't so uncertain after all. Maybe, with Caleb by her side, it would be okay. She walked over to him, feeling the weight of the decision that had been building inside her. When she reached him, she paused, her heart pounding in her chest. "Caleb," she said, her voice steady but soft, "I'm ready." He looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment before a slow smile spread across his face. "I'm right here," he said, his voice low and reassuring. And in that moment, Emma knew that they were no longer just partners. They were something more, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The days seemed to grow heavier as Emma and Caleb continued to work side by side on the ranch, their bond deepening with each passing week. Yet, despite all the progress they had made, Emma felt a sense of uncertainty creeping in. The ranch, though healthier, still carried a looming sense of threat. The threat of failure, the fear of losing everything she had worked so hard to save. And more than anything, there was the unspoken tension between her and Caleb, the growing feelings that neither of them had fully acknowledged. It was a crisp morning when Emma received the letter. She had been out checking the cattle when one of the ranch hands brought it to her. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and as soon as Emma saw the return address, her stomach dropped. It was from the bank, the very bank that had been threatening to take the ranch from her for months. She had tried to ignore it, to focus on the day-to-day tasks that kept her mind occupied, but this letter was different. This one was marked "Final Notice." Her hands trembled as she tore open the envelope, the words inside seeming to blur together. The bank was giving her one final chance, a chance to pay off the remaining debt or risk losing everything. It was a crushing blow. She had done everything she could, worked harder than she had ever worked in her life, and still, it wasn't enough. The weight of the letter felt like a physical burden, pressing down on her chest. Emma stood there, holding the paper in her hands, staring at the words that threatened to end everything she had fought for. But what could she do? The money just wasn't coming in. The market for cattle had been fluctuating, and even with Caleb's help, there was only so much they could do. As she stood there, frozen in disbelief, Caleb appeared at her side, having noticed her standing still for too long. His eyes immediately took in the letter in her hand, and he didn't need to ask. He knew. He could see it in her face, the same despair he had seen in his own heart when he had lost things he cared about. "What does it say?" Caleb asked quietly, his voice softer than usual. Emma could only shake her head. "It's over, Caleb. They're taking the ranch. I can't do this anymore." For a moment there was silence. Caleb stepped closer, taking the letter from her hands and reading it himself. Emma could feel his presence beside her, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to the storm raging in her chest. After a few moments, he folded the letter carefully and handed it back to her. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice steady. "We'll figure it out. We've come this far, and I'm not going to let it all fall apart now." Emma looked at him, her heart a mix of frustration and hope. "What can we do? I've tried everything. I don't have the money to pay off the debt, and the ranch isn't worth enough to sell." Caleb placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch firm but comforting. "I don't know what the solution is yet, but I'm not giving up, and I'm not asking you to give up either." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that there was a way out, but she couldn't see it. The reality of her situation was too overwhelming. The ranch that had been her father's legacy was slipping through her fingers, and with it, the life she had hoped to build. But Caleb wasn't ready to give up, and neither was Emma, at least, not entirely. She realized, standing there beside him, that maybe she hadn't done everything she could. Maybe there was a solution she hadn't thought of, a way to turn things around. But the fear of failure was real, and for the first time in a long while, Emma wasn't sure if she had the strength to fight anymore. That evening, as they sat together on the porch, the weight of the day still hung heavy in the air. Caleb was quiet, watching the stars as they began to dot the sky. Emma sat beside him, lost in thought, her mind racing with possibilities and doubts. "You know," Caleb said after a long silence, "there's always a way. It might not be easy and it might take some time, but I believe in this place. I believe in you." Emma looked at him, surprised by the depth of his words. "You really think we can turn it around?" "I do," Caleb said without hesitation. "We've got something here, Emma. A partnership, a future, and it's worth fighting for." Emma's heart swelled with emotion. She hadn't realized how much she had come to depend on him, how much his presence had anchored her in a way nothing else had. He was right. They had something. They had built something together, something that was worth fighting for. And if she could summon the courage to believe in it, maybe they could find a way to save the ranch. The next day, Caleb took charge. He spent hours going over the ranch's finances, talking to local buyers, and reaching out to anyone he knew who might be able to help. Emma followed him, but she found herself struggling with doubt. The bank's ultimatum still loomed over her like a dark cloud, and she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. By the end of the week, Caleb had a plan. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was something, a way to get through the next few months while they figured out a more permanent fix. He had managed to secure a loan from a private investor who was willing to take a chance on the ranch. It wasn't the full amount Emma needed, but it was enough to buy them some time. It wasn't a guarantee, and Emma knew that, but it was a lifeline. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a spark of hope. As the weeks went by, they worked harder than ever. The ranch began to show signs of life. The cattle were thriving, the crops were growing, and the land itself seemed to be breathing again. The weight of the world was still heavy on Emma's shoulders, but now she had someone beside her who believed in her, who believed in them. But the threat of the bank still lingered, and the pressure of the loan weighed heavily on Emma's mind. She knew that they couldn't afford to let up. There was too much at stake. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of work, Emma found herself standing alone by the barn. The sky was darkening, the stars just beginning to appear, and the air was cooler than usual. She had been thinking about everything: the ranch, her father's legacy, the future Caleb. There was so much she didn't know, so much uncertainty, but one thing had become clear to her: she wasn't alone anymore. Caleb appeared beside her, his silhouette outlined by the setting sun. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, letting the quiet settle around them. "I don't know what's going to happen," Emma said softly, her voice carrying the weight of all her fears. "But I don't want to lose this place. I don't want to lose you." Caleb turned to face her, his eyes warm and steady. "You won't lose me, Emma, and you won't lose this place. We'll make it work, together." The words hung in the air between them, simple but powerful. Emma realized then that the future wasn't so uncertain after all. They had a chance, a real chance, to save the ranch, to build something that was theirs, something worth fighting for. And with Caleb by her side, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning sun stretched its golden fingers across the horizon, painting the ranch in soft light. Emma stood on the porch, her eyes scanning the familiar land that had once felt like a burden, but now seemed to breathe with new life. It had been months since the loan had given them a glimmer of hope, and the ranch was thriving again. The cattle were strong, the crops were healthy, and the fences, now mended and sturdy, stood tall against the wind. Still, there was something inside Emma that wasn't quite at peace. The bank's looming shadow still threatened the ranch, even if for now they were holding on. Every day felt like a new battle, a new challenge, but with Caleb beside her, it didn't seem as impossible. He had kept his promise, his quiet presence and unshakable confidence carrying them through the hardest moments. But the fear of losing everything never quite left her heart. It was a constant companion. Caleb joined her on the porch, his boots making soft thuds against the wooden planks. He stood beside her, his gaze following hers out to the fields. "You're quiet this morning," he said, his voice a mixture of concern and curiosity. Emma sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "I'm just thinking. We've made progress, Caleb, a lot of progress, but I can't help but feel like we're still walking a tightrope." Caleb looked at her, his expression calm but serious. "We're not walking a tightrope anymore, Emma. We've got a foundation. We've got a future. And we're not doing this alone. You're not doing this alone." Emma turned to him, her eyes meeting his. And in that moment, she saw something in him she hadn't fully understood before. A steady, unwavering belief that everything would be all right. And it was in that belief, that deep trust between them, that Emma began to let go of some of her fears. "I know," she said softly, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "But I guess I'll always be a little afraid. I'm not used to feeling so vulnerable, but I'm trying." Caleb reached out, gently cupping her hand in his. "It's okay to be afraid, but don't let it hold you back. Not anymore. You're stronger than you think, Emma." Her heart fluttered at the way he spoke, like he truly believed in her. And in that belief, she found something she had never expected: peace. The fear that had plagued her for so long didn't vanish overnight, but with Caleb by her side, it was easier to push it aside, to face the future with hope instead of dread. For the next few weeks, life on the ranch settled into a rhythm. The weather had been kind and the crops were thriving. The loan was being paid off slowly but surely, and the ranch was steadily moving toward stability. It wasn't perfect. There were still setbacks, challenges, and moments of doubt, but it felt like they were finally in control. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, Caleb and Emma found themselves working together in the barn. The scent of hay and leather filled the air, and the low hum of the animals in the distance created a comforting soundtrack to their work. They were cleaning out the stalls, an almost meditative task that allowed them to work in silence, yet still feel the unspoken connection between them. As Emma bent down to scoop up a pile of hay, she felt Caleb's eyes on her. She glanced up, meeting his gaze, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. The years of hard work, the months of struggle, the endless hours spent together, all of it led to this moment. A quiet understanding passed between them, and in that understanding, Emma realized that this was what she had been searching for. Not just the ranch, but the partnership, the love, the life they had built together. "Caleb," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I think I'm ready." He raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Ready for what?" "Ready to stop worrying so much," she said, her heart beating a little faster. "Ready to trust that everything is going to be okay. Ready to take the next step." Caleb set down the shovel in his hand, walking over to her. His eyes searched hers, and for a brief moment, Emma saw the same uncertainty she had felt mirrored in him. But then, just as quickly, it was replaced with something else, something warm, something real. "I think I'm ready for that too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've come a long way, Emma, and we've still got a long road ahead, but I can't imagine walking it with anyone else." Emma's heart swelled as he took her hand in his, pulling her gently toward him. There was no more hesitation, no more uncertainty. In that moment, they both knew that they were in this for the long haul, together. The next few months were a blur of hard work, but there was a new lightness in the air. The ranch was finally on solid footing. Caleb and Emma's partnership had grown into something more, something deeper. Their days were filled with laughter and shared moments of quiet joy. They had found something rare, something worth fighting for, and they were building it together, brick by brick. One evening, as the sun began to set, Caleb and Emma stood on the porch, watching the horizon light up with vibrant colors. The air was cool, and the world around them seemed at peace. "This is it, isn't it?" Emma said softly, her eyes scanning the land that had once seemed so overwhelming, so uncertain. "This is just the beginning," Caleb replied, his voice filled with conviction. "We've come a long way, Emma, but the best is yet to come." Emma smiled, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. She had faced her fears, had let go of the doubts that had once held her back. And now, standing beside Caleb, she knew that they had built something lasting, something strong. "I never thought I'd be here," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought I'd be able to do this, but with you by my side I found a way." Caleb turned to her, his expression softening. "You were always capable, Emma. You just needed to believe in yourself, and I'll always be here to remind you of that." Emma looked at him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and love. The journey they had taken together hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every struggle, every setback. Because in the end, they had found each other and they had found a future, one that was built on trust, on love, and on the strength of their shared dreams. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Emma leaned into Caleb, feeling the warmth of his presence beside her. The ranch, once a symbol of her struggles and fears, had become a place of hope, of possibility. And with Caleb by her side, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The wind whispered through the trees, and for the first time in a long while, Emma felt at peace. This was her home. This was where she belonged. And with Caleb by her side, she knew that anything was possible.